not only sort of kind of getting into warehouse, faking contracts to say that they've leased it and stuff like that. And the meet points were like basically a way of like kind of losing the police. You go, right, we'd have like several meet points. They would see everyone going that way, but actually the party was on the other side of town. But
I'm on my way to London's Barbican Centre to meet immersive artist Darren Emerson. He's created a VR piece called In Pursuit of Repetitive Beats, and it's the closest that any millennial or Gen Z person could get to going to an illegal rave in the acid house glory days. You get strapped to a VR headset, have various technological contraptions strapped to your extremities, and you are transported back to 1989. You start in a mate's bedroom with the walls adorned with rave flyers. You're all itching for a sesh and determined to find the party. You tune into pirate radio, head to a phone box to ring the party line, and wait for instructions. Meanwhile, the police are mounting an equally enthusiastic operation of their own, but this one has a very different aim. They want to stop the rave altogether. It's an exhibition. It's not trying to recreate or replace IRL events. It's more like a sensory music documentary that you actually walk through and kind of experience the documentary. I met Darren at the gallery space a day before the exhibition was due to start. We spoke about acid house, creating art, the link between football hooliganism and early raves, and subcultures in general.
Guys, we're here with Darren Emerson. He's an artist who has created an immersive experience around acid house. Do you want to let us know exactly what this project is?
yes, hi. This project's called In Pursuit of Repetitive Beats. It's set on one night in 1989, and it takes audiences back to a period when acid house was just exploding. And you're kind of on an adventure, really. It's an adventure to find an illegal acid house party somewhere on the outskirts of Coventry.
And this terminology that you've used, repetitive beats, I believe that's from a piece of legislation. Can you explain to us about that?
Indeed, yeah. I can't exactly remember the exact piece of legislation, but it was around sort of how they would sort of be able to stop parties, basically. If they encountered repetitive beats, then that meant that that was a sign that they could close down a party, basically.
So the terminology, the legal terminology of an illegal rave is about a succession of repetitive beats, and that's where you took the title from.
That's exactly it, yeah.
What's your personal connection or interest to this world?
Well, I'm 48, so I went clubbing, raving in the mid-90s, and so a little bit after this time. But it was still before mobile phones, it was still before the internet, actually, and stuff like that. So the experience in terms of the adventure element of it, getting into a car, going somewhere with some mates, and really taking a risk and not really knowing where you're going to end up was definitely part of it. And when we interviewed people for this project, that's the one thing that they most sort of felt nostalgic for. It's just like, that sense of adventure. So I really missed that. I mean, I started writing this during COVID, and I just kind of was like, I really miss my friends. Also, you get older, you have kids, you have responsibilities, you've got to pay the mortgage, and actually really part of you is always that 19-year-old who just wants to go and like connect with your friends and have some fun. So it's about those kind of seminal nights where you take a risk, you go out, and before you know it, it's that you're walking through a field in the sun's rising and you feel totally transformed. That's really the spirit of this piece of work. I would kind of describe it as a living documentary. Mm-hmm. Some people have looked at images of it and going, it's like trying to replace raving. It's not. It's a music documentary. It's a cinematic adventure where the documentary is all around you. It's in the things that you pick up, it's the things that you can hear, but you're on this narrative journey, and it has these moments, I guess, of transcendence, of abstraction, where you feel like you're maybe coming up, or you're getting ready to go into a rave, and you feel that sense of nervousness. And all the techniques that we use, all the multi-sensory immersion techniques, are really really focused to making it a rewarding emotional journey.
Absolutely. Especially the way that the sort of thing that vibrates on your chest sort of builds the anticipation, which I think everyone who's ever been to anything electronic music event has felt that anticipation. It's a cross between excitement and anxiety almost. You don't know what's happening next. Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that this is a sort of like an interactive music documentary. So who is the target audience more? Is it the sort of old school heads that are coming to relive the trip down memory lane, or is it to introduce this culture to a new generation of young people who have elements of this culture but in a slightly different way?
It's both. You know, we have people coming who are very nostalgic for it, and you often see them come in groups with the people that they experienced it with, and then hugging and like kind of being very emotional at the end, because it's kind of a love letter to that time, and it is a kind of, in a sense, it's kind of a lost time, especially sort of kind of acid house and how it was when it began, very DIY, very sort of community based. And then you have lots of younger people as well coming who, I mean, I had somebody yesterday, and I've had this a few times, people saying, I feel nostalgic for something I never lived through. And maybe, you know, I think that's a really interesting idea, to feel nostalgia for something you wish you had been part of. And I think that's maybe a kind of reaction. I tend to look at it as a reaction to how life is at the moment in terms of modern living, in terms of the fact that we are all connected now. There is a lot of connection, but it's the quality of connection which is the problem. And I think what I'm trying to do is use this technology, this cutting edge technology, to tell a story really about human connection on a very sort of personal level, where you're in basically a room full of people all sweating, experiencing something like a rave together, you know.
So when people go to these events now, I think young people do have elements of it, but in a slightly more commercial sense in most cases. There is still small subcultures keeping the free party scene alive. But people, what you're describing and what people who've been to these events are describing is sort of a spiritual transcendence of some type. Is it almost a quasi-religious experience for some people, do you think?
I would say so. Whether it's, you know, I would say it's spiritual at least, you know, in terms of, you know, and I felt it as a spiritual experience when I did it. You know, I was really shy when I was young. Could never dance at anything, you know, like, and you know, like a family wedding or whatever, I'd just be sitting there. And my mates, when I went to university, said, you got to come to this thing, you got to come. And, you know, and the same thing as you were describing earlier, that feeling of anxiety, should you do it? You know, are you going to do it? And I went, and, you know, they lost me in this big, it was Club UK in Wandsworth at the time. And they lost me, they were really worried where I was, and then they found me and I was on stage, like, just going for it with my t-shirt off. And from that moment onwards, it was sort of like an awakening for me. And like, you know, I feel quite emotional about it, because it allowed me to be the person that I always thought I was but could never express or never felt comfortable being. And it was those friendships and that openness and that feeling of kind of community and acceptance that was a real sort of, it was transcendent for me, and I think a lot of people experienced that, and so I think that's very special for people, whether it was about acid house or if they went to a drum and bass night or a garage night or whatever they did, it's special. Yeah.
Or even perhaps indeed a football match, or even church.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, football is another, you know, I'm quite passionate about football as well, and you can see that there are similar, you know, there's a similar sort of, it's the collective. It's about being part of a collective. And I think often, you know, this piece is set in 89 really because this is when the birth of acid house comes. But it's also politically, it's kind of more interesting because it's at the end of sort of Margaret Thatcher's sort of time in power, coming to an end. The country through the 80s has changed from a country that had an industrial heartland to a service economy and something that is very much run by the city, which leaves a lot of empty spaces, empty industrial spaces. Coventry, for example, is known as the Detroit of the UK, car manufacturing. And there's a Peugeot in the piece, which is Peugeot was manufactured in Coventry. And so you've got a lot of kind of unemployment, a lot of disillusioned young people who create something for themselves in a DIY nature and reclaim those spaces and create communities out of it in the absence of the government or, like, you know, the government basically being able to do that for them. So I think that's really interesting, and I think in the absence of that sort of stuff, you see it all again. People create their own networks, their own communities, and I think that's something that I'm really interested in just generally for my work.
Absolutely. So what is the creative process of putting something like that? Because we've just experienced it. It's fantastic. There's loads of little bits, little sort of embellishments that you might not get every time, and all these little things, but it's also the music, the interactive nature of it, the sort of visuals. How do you go about, what's your creative process creating this?
That's a good question. It's a hard question because it is very complex. And you know, we put a lot of effort into the details, and you know, I can get quite sort of nerdy about, like, you know, what the shoes are in the corner of the room, what, you know, there's a bit, you know, where they're playing cards in the bedroom and they're playing Shithead, which is the game that me and my mates play, and they're at a crucial moment in the game, which if you know how to play Shithead, you would get that. And so there's all of these Easter eggs in there. There's all sorts of kind of different things. The creative process really starts with a narrative. What's the narrative you want to tell? And for me, the narrative was quite clearly, it's like, okay, it starts in the evening, it's about going out, and it finishes when the sun comes up. So that gives you a framework to work within. Then it's very much about finding the right people to talk to, the right voices that can articulate what you have in your head from their real life experience. And that sort of adds a lot of idiosyncrasy and that sort of kind of quality of, like, people sort of who have these stories that they can tell, which you could never write yourself. And then it's about sort of kind of breaking that up into scenes, designing those scenes, those environments. VR is very much about different environments. So, you know, we have these different environments and trying to tell the story through those environments. Working with, you know, we have a big team that worked on this, like a really amazing team. Some of them are like filmed, 360 videos, some of it's editing, some of it's 3D game engine developers, a lot of it is 3D artists, all sorts of different things, interaction specialists, music specialists, spatial audio specialists. It's like making a film, basically. Yes. So, you know, I sit here and I'm talking about it because I conceived it, and you know, I kind of, but you know, I couldn't have done it without all of these people, and you know, licensing what's the music we're going to use, all this kind of stuff. So, you know, all of that sort of stuff is integral. So it's a long process, and it, you know, you have to be very like, yeah. But I'm just, that's what I do. I'm really into it. So, you know.
And even the sort of scene where you finally arrive at the rave, I don't want to give too much away, but you finally arrive at the rave after this big, long adventure. And then even the way that the couple are interacting with each other is exactly how they would do in a rave. And, you know, that because they're sort of experiencing the spiritual transcendence that we spoke about before.
Yeah.
So do you get
and
this...
they're a bit wasted as well.
Well, you said it, not me. But... how did you get that? The movement was all perfect of all the people at the party. How did you do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a massive challenge, actually, because, like, you know, when you're making this, you know at some point you've got to get to the rave. Yes. And, like, the rave was like, oh, okay, oh, shit, like, okay, yeah, how are we going to do this in VR? And it not be crap, basically, which was the worry. And we did lots of tests, like, you know, some of the tests we did in headset, we got some, like, there's stock footage online on, like, you know, where you can go and it's like silhouette and it's like parties. And we just put it in there just to see what was going on. And you could see the, like, the looping. It'd be like, someone would be like, way, like that, and then it'd be like, way, like, and it'd be like, and I was just like, that, right, I know what I don't want. Yes. So what we ended up doing was we got two dancers, male and female. We did motion capture with both of them, and what I decided to do, I got them to study all the archive from the time, the dance moves, and then we got them to do different dance loops. So we have to loop the movement. So so it's a small little dance loop that begins and ends at the same body position, but we did it in different intensities. So you got some which are kind of like, you know, kind of in your zone, just doing your thing. Some where you're like really going for it. So 1 to 10. And then in that environment, we have these 3D models that you can't really see because it's dark, and that's kind of the point. And they're kind of accessing all these different loops. So the overall effect is to feel, actually, when you're in there, that it's kind of chaotic and a bit like what it would be, like really sort of random. Everyone's got their own sort of moves. And then we have these kind of hero characters, and what I did with them in the motion capture is I kind of got them to act out these kind of different ideas, which was like, you know, I'm kind of like resting, I'm like, I'm a bit, you know, or like we're kind of like feeling kind of hands in the air kind of thing, all these different kind of things. Or like moments where they would kind of embrace and then they would split again. Because I just remember that, you know, you'd be with your friends and you'd have a moment, you go, you know, this is fucking amazing.
And the tune kicks in again.
You go off.
Here we go.
And then there'd be that moment and they sort of split with kind of particle effect that shows that these are just moments throughout the night. And so that's what we did, and that took a long time, you know, and it was like a lot of effort to make it feel kind of realistic, as much as realistic as we could. I think the key with a scene like that, because it was quite darkly lit, which raves would have been back then, is the more that you show, probably the less realistic it would feel. Mm-hmm. So, you know, sometimes less is more.
Yeah. I think anyone who goes through these experiences, you do experience the 1 to 10 throughout the night. It's just that it's over 10 hours instead of, you know, in a sort of shorter, truncated version of that, if you will.
There's a making of documentary, 3-part making of documentary on YouTube if you want to check it out. Yeah. Where that motion capture stuff is in that as well, where we're doing that.
Yeah, we'll put that in the description for this video. At the time, did you get a sense, because you came in from the tail end of the rave culture, but did you get a sense at the time that this culture is going to go on to completely transform fashion, music, youth culture, and even drug culture forever? Or did you just think, oh, it's just the latest thing?
No, I mean, I think by the time that I was doing it in '95, I think it already had become that. You know, we had like big clubs opening at that point, like Home and like, you know, these 24-hour sort of kind of clubs. I think already by then it was becoming quite commercialized. It's kind of interesting because you see a lot of the people, even the people that we were the promoters in Coventry, talking to them, they feel a little bit almost aggrieved that they are not, like, they didn't make the money that, you know, that they could have made, because it was all a little bit like they were doing it for the first time. It didn't exist before this. So I think what you see is, like, eventually people see, oh, someone's making some money on a rave. Business people get involved, people who can commercialize it, and then it becomes that. And I think the people that maybe benefited most from that period are the actual DJs. The people like Cole Cox and stuff like that, who was DJing at these raves. Now is obviously a global. Sasha. You know, all of these people.
Fatboy Slim.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was quite clear. I mean, that by the mid-90s that it had done that. I mean, I was lucky enough to be living at uni and being invited to all these different kind of. The guy I lived with had decks and a mixer. It's like the only guy like in this place that had decks and a mixer. So we went to everything, in disused railway tunnels, submarines. At one point, that was a mad one, in a forest.
Wow.
So we used to drive around.
Was the submarine submerged? No.
It was in water.
Wow.
It was moored.
Semi-submerged.
Yeah. It wasn't going
Submerge
down.
it so the police can't come.
I mean, I would have probably freaked out if it started going down. No, but it was harboured. But it was a wicked rave. I mean, I was quite wasted that night, but it was brilliant.
And what about the music?
I don't encourage drugs.
What about the music side of things? How did you develop the music side of this project?
Interestingly, well, you know, originally I was like, right, it's set in 1989, so all the music has to be from 1989. It was like I was going to be really strict about that. Eventually, I was like, actually, that's kind of limiting, because it is cinematic as well in a way. So actually, it's a mix of different eras. So we've got stuff like Orbital, which came out 89, 90, like the first release 89 and 90. And then we've got Jerry Beltram at the end with Energy Flash, which is from that period. And then we also worked with a record label in Birmingham called Network Records, who were an original importer of Acid House back in the day, and they still put out compilations now. So we've got 3 tracks from them. And then actually for some scenes I wanted to use some modern music, so Max Cooper's got a track in it, an electronic artist who's actually doing a piece in the Barbican right now, in the car park. One of his tracks is really integral. It's a really integral scene, and it's an amazing track, but it really works for what I was trying to communicate in terms of like this whole sort of kind of getting to the rave in this convoy kind of thing. And then we end with a Joe Goddard track. So obviously, you know, it's kind of like a up-to-date track, which I just felt, you know, when you hear something, you just feel this has the right feeling, the right sort of spirituality again of what I wanted. And so we close with that track, and I think it works really, really well in terms of going well with the voices of people sort of talking about how they feel, then reminiscing and stuff like that. So, you know, obviously having to clear all these things, you know, licensing them all and stuff, which is a job in itself. But really fun. I mean, I'm so passionate about music anyway, so I'm a bit of a geek about it. So, you know,
evidently,
yeah.
So I've listened to some of the reviews, because when you come out, you can listen to some of the audience reviews on the old payphone here.
Yes.
It seems to me a disproportionate amount of people cry when they see this. But what emotions did it elicit in you the first time you saw the finished piece?
I mean, that's a hard question because you're so in it. I mean, I must have watched it like about 500,000 times.
So you're bored of it, right?
No, but I did it. Honestly, I did it the other day with my kid, my 10-year-old boy, and my wife, who hadn't done it for a while, but my kid had never done it. I had a real fun doing it. There's a scene, we call it scene 6, but it's, no one's going to know what that means. But it's the scene with the Max Cooper soundtrack, which is set in a world of flyer artwork. It's about sort of kind of, you're finding the meet point, like getting in the car, you're chased by the police and stuff like that. And it's really sort of transcendent. It's very abstract because it's in this kind of like flyer artwork world, which the flyers back in those days were like, people would go to libraries and photograph covers of like science fiction novels and stuff like that. And so that scene in particular, just the sound and the interaction and how it ends, still gives me a buzz. I'm still like, oh yeah, that's wicked.
get the goosebumps.
Yeah, definitely. Still, and which is quite rare for something that because otherwise, mainly you probably just look at the things that you maybe would have done slightly differently.
Yeah, but I know what you feel though, because it's like when I write an article. The article comes out and everyone wants to talk about it then, but I've lived this for the last 3 months. I don't want to hear about the article anymore, So obviously, when you look at this sort of subculture now, 30 years on, you've got general people, it's celebrated in British culture, but you also interviewed the police who were there to sort of destroy it in a way. Well, how did the police officers feel about it now, 30 years on?
I think, to me, the police seem fairly benevolent, to be honest with you. I feel like they were told that they had to do something and they just go and do, we're just going to go do it. They still, to me, didn't really seem to understand exactly what it is or was. There was still a kind of misconception that acid house meant LSD when we interviewed them. And they would try to, some of them tried to clarify that it wasn't that these raves were illegal. They just weren't licensed, and they were not licensable. So licensing. I interviewed one police expert. He was everything about licensing law. Right. It's quite a long interview, but he was basically trying to explain that there wasn't any licensing laws for this. It had never been done before. So he just said, "What do you do?" So they would try and find reasons to stop it, and a lot of those reasons were actually around health and safety and fire regulations. Everyone's in you've got 1,000 people in a warehouse with like no toilets and like no fire escapes. I can see from their point of view, and generally now as a dad, that there could be a problem there. To be fair to them, they sort of all admitted they didn't really know what was going on, that they were of a different generation, and when they did go down, they felt that it was fairly sort of benign in a sense of like everyone was really like sort of quite warm and open and very, so they weren't having any trouble in terms of violence and aggression because everyone was kind of not in that state.
Yes, of course,
and so they, it was easier for them most of the time just to let it happen rather than sort of try and break up, try and send 2,000 people home. It's just like, all right, we'll just monitor it, make sure it's safe, and then and that's it. There are obviously examples where that didn't happen. But and a lot of the people who were sort of raving and stuff at that time just described the police as almost like kind of like uniformed parking attendants, helping you get your car out of the field, like come this way, and there's a scene in there where we're about the helicopter, where they scramble a helicopter, and that's a real story where it's like the helicopter's obviously there to monitor it, but eventually it's just like all these people can't get to where they need to get to, so they start pointing the way because in a sense it's safer for them to get these people in than for them to just be hanging around like in the streets or in the fields or whatever. So I think it's almost echoes of a bit of a more innocent time, No CCTV really, like CCTV now monitoring, it's like you can't go anywhere, right? So
but Do you think there would have been quite the sense of adventure, quite the sense of freedom, quite the sense of escapism if it had been completely legit and there would have been someone with a sort of orange jacket ushering you into the party and it was all very safe?
No. So, I mean, the whole thing about the cat and mouse sort of kind of game is really interesting, and you see the sort of entrepreneurial and the sort of really clever thinking of these guys who are, not only sort of kind of getting into warehouse, faking contracts to say that they've leased it and stuff like that, but also like working out this meet points. And the meet points were like basically a way of like kind of losing the police. You go, right, we'd have like several meet points. They would see everyone going that way, but actually the party was on the other side of town. But then they'd send them over here, and at the very last moment, when the speakers and everything was ready, they'd say, right, it's here, and everyone would go there. By the time that happens, the police are kind of on the back foot, and so that was the thing. I think the police would break it up if there was like a handful of people there. As soon as they get 1,000 people, 2,000 people in the warehouse, it's too late. Yeah. Too late. It's more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, it could incite a riot at that point.
But that's very clever thinking. And it shows like just that nature of like flyering, pirate radio, organisation. One of the things that came out of this project, which I thought was probably one of the most interesting things, was around football culture, and kind of football hooliganism, which at the time in the late 80s was obviously everywhere. But the same sort of kind of skill sets that would be able to organise a meet-up between two rival firms without the police knowing, so they could have like a proper fight. The same sort of skill sets that they would employ to put on a rave, which obviously has a totally different outcome.
And of course there was a crossover between this football culture because, as you mentioned, some of the old football hooligans who'd sort of reformed had then been drafted in as security on these parties.
Yeah. So, a lot of people say, this is set in the Midlands. Midlands obviously is a place where there are a lot of big football teams. You've got Birmingham, Aston Villa, Wolves, Coventry. Just loads of big football teams there that all had their own firms. And they all knew each other. I mean, and they were all rivals and they're all like kind of fighting at the weekend. But, suddenly they've got something to coalesce around. And that's just really interesting that at the end of the 80s, I think there seems to be a bit of fatigue around football violence, where they think, well, are we going to do this forever? And actually this gives them a way out, gives them something to do together. It sort of employs their skill sets, but also with the addition of ecstasy and the feeling that ecstasy gives you, and the openness and the kind of, suddenly these people who are fighting actually are like kind of hugging each other, or like going, oh, you're all right, maybe do you want to do this party? Suddenly they become like business partners. And so that's a really interesting sort of, I think it's in terms of social history of the scene, I think it's really, really interesting. Of course, you can track it a few years later where, and the drugs and all that kind of stuff in it, but, it becomes a bit more of a problem in terms of organised crime and stuff like that. So it's not all rosy. I'm not trying to be like, and everyone was just kind of skipping around. But this is set at a moment in time, and I think it's kind of, in a sense, that moment in time is actually quite innocent in the sense of like, it hadn't been done before. These are like, this is a new thing.
This is 1989, which they particularly called the Summer of Love, right? The second Summer of Love. The first one was in the 60s, right?
Yes. And, I don't really remember it, actually, to be honest with you, but I would have been, 13, 14? But it was a hot summer.
Yeah.
And this was happening all over the country. All these raves are going on. So I think, if you were of a certain age, if you're 19, 18, 16, whatever you were at that time, or in your 20s, you were swept up in this, and people just remember that as just a magical moment, and I think that's something worth celebrating.
So you were 13, 14 at this time. So were you starting to capture a sense of the moral panic that was incoming?
Yeah. I mean, like, a lot of my work actually sort of, I like to kind of almost like reframe things that I've lived through that I didn't really sort of kind of understand at the time. I do remember sort of the moral panic. I remember hearing about it. I remember like rave music being on top of the pops and going like, acid, all that kind of stuff. Exactly. So, and I did a piece about social housing as well, about the Aylesbury estate, which I remember as a kid. I had friends there, and I come from like more of a middle class sort of kind of terrace house, but I go into his house in this massive estate and feeling like a bit freaked out, like, I'm a bit scared. And then that piece sort of reframes why places like that are portrayed in a certain way, and I like to kind of explore that. And so part of this was kind of exploring what was really the case of what was happening, because people will, if they only took the Daily Mail or the Sun's point of view, or like the sort of kind of then you'd have a very different idea of what it was. And that's why when you're in the bedroom, you've got the the BBC News comes on, and it's like there's been a rave today and all this stuff's happened, so
it really sets the tone for the adventure ahead, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think that this culture, that was the ghost
of 1989.
Do you think that this culture was, I mean, there is some people that think that this was the last great British subculture. Do you think, have you got any thoughts on that?
I mean, it has been said, yeah. I mean, I feel like if you try and think about like what has come after, it's hard to pinpoint, because if, you would lump other things like garage and drum and bass into the same, because it is dance music, it's just the evolution of different genres and stuff like that. And you could even take grime and say, right, okay, maybe grime is something that is kind of unique in itself as well, in terms of where it comes out of an urban sort of environment. But I don't think there's been anything that has become like a subculture that has kind of taken over and kind of penetrated sort of kind of the general kind of consciousness and become commercialized. No, I can't think of anything really.
I don't think there's any period that is quite as fetishized as this period.
Yeah, 89, there's a lot going on in 89, you know. Hillsborough disaster, Berlin Wall comes down, Tiananmen Square, and and raving and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's one of those moments culturally, politically and creatively that sort of kind of where ideas, frustrations, social dynamics coalesce to create something. I would probably say that we are in a similar period now. That's the only thing that I would say in terms of if you're comparing now to then, that we are in a period of where people are very dissatisfied with the world. There is a lot of really bad stuff happening, and it would be amazing if something could come out of that. I wouldn't say raving was not about protesting, so it's not it's a protest movement. It was just sort of almost like a enforced civil liberty, taking control of their own civil liberty. So, I mean, we need something like that now, really. But yeah, I can't think of anything. You go back, someone says in the piece, before that it was punk, and that was the thing. Obviously you had two-tone and stuff like that, but more localized. But punk definitely was a sort of culture movement, and it transcended just where it came from.
I guess you had the hippies, then you had disco, then you had punk.
Yeah.
Right? Then you had acid house.
Yeah.
And then you had social media.
Well, I guess you're right. I mean, I guess that would be the thing. I think that in terms of social media, I think we're yet to discover what the result of all of this is. But I certainly think that people are fatigued by social media.
Yeah.
They want real connection again.
There's one theory that social media has made subcultures much more fragmented. So whereas in the past you would have had to sort of assign yourself to the subculture, buy the physical magazine, go and get the outfit and everything, and there was also a political sort of norms and values within that subculture. But now every subculture is available to everyone on social media, so you can pick and borrow from various.
And maybe that will create sort of its own sort of whatever sort of kind of magpie style kind of cultures that are coming out from a bit of this, a bit of that. I mean, I'm writing something at the moment about skateboarding culture, the history of UK skateboarding culture, which again is a very DIY culture in terms of, especially after the 70s with the boom, and then into the 80s where no one wanted to skateboard, and it was really dead. But that's when the subculture emerges with zines and meetups and stuff like that, and then again it becomes popular by the end of the 80s again, and then street skating starts and all that kind of stuff. So those sorts of they interest me, how those sort of kind of cultures and communities again sort of come together. I mean, part of it probably though for me is like I'm of a certain age now. Like someone asked me like in Amsterdam when we showed this in Amsterdam, go, oh, so where are the good parties now? And I'm like, you're asking the wrong person. Like I'm not that guy anymore.
Yeah,
like, I'm not that guy. I'm a dad of two.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm into what I'm doing and the documentary filmmaking stuff. So I don't, you know, I think it's easy for people of a certain generation, certainly my generation, to be like, oh yeah, back then it was all like this, and that, everyone has their own thing as they're growing up. And you know, we've had people come to this, young people go, oh yeah, we're still going to illegal raves. They're just organised on Telegram and stuff like that. It's a different thing, you know, but as long as the feeling or what you get out of it is similar, then you know, then it's all good. I mean, there is, interestingly, in VR on places like VR Chat, where people, you know, VR Chat is where you, as a bedroom creator, you can create your own universe, your own environment, and there are actual clubs in there where people go clubbing in VR Chat, and there are DJs that play nights there in these like kind of clubs that have been built, and that, in a sense, where you have an avatar all from around the world, you know, in terms of how people feel safe in a safe space, maybe identify in a certain way and feel that this environment will help them with that. I think that's a really interesting sort of kind of culture that's coming out of VR in terms of user-generated VR.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, it's like at odds against this original culture, which was about bringing people together physically. But I guess people are still being brought together in a digital space.
Yeah, exactly. And using their avatars, you know. And I think there's less. People have said to me it feels like there's less opportunity to have that physical space now. Clubs are closing in London and around, you know, the country. Mainly probably because of austerity and like, you know, just like the bombardment of bad policy after bad policy and cost of living and stuff like that. So, you know, young people are up against it. I wouldn't want to be a young person right now.
Although that situation is exactly the sort of social conditions that would be ripe for a renaissance of all this kind of thing.
Exactly. Actually, you know, good art, good movements come out of struggle, come out of disaffection. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see, I guess. Hopefully social media hasn't made everybody just sort of so benign. Like, yeah, I'm really angry about that. Oh, scroll.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Anyway, let the audience know, where can they find your stuff? Where can they find your stuff?
Got a bit depressing in there. Come and see In Pursuit of Repetitive Beats. It's at the Barbican. It opens to the public tomorrow, which is May 22nd, and it's on till August the 3rd. Come with three of your friends, so 4 people can do it together, and that's the best way of doing it. You can pass things together, you can go on the adventure together. Come down.